Hey guys, today I'm looking at Death, Sleep, and the Traveler by John Hawkes. This book was published in the 70s, kind of midway into John Hawkes' literary career. I had read a couple of his other works, and I'd always found him to be an interesting writer. This book takes its title from a sculpture that a friend of his had made. This friend ended up committing suicide. Suicide doesn't really have a big part in this book, more so in Second Skin. But he used the title. He got the idea of the story from a newspaper article that he had read while he was traveling in Europe. So the story concerns a man who goes onto a cruise, really at the urging of his wife, alone. And on the cruise, a crime occurs, involving a young girl, and the man is found guilty, tried, acquitted. The wife supports him during the trial, and then in the end, she leaves him. Not really giving away any spoilers for this book, because he pretty much tells you straight away that these are the events that he's going to be examining. This writer is not too big on plot. So the narrative is spliced into three strands. There's the cruise events, there's life before the cruise, and then there's the aftermath. The main character in this book is a Dutchman named Allert van der Veenen, who is a large fellow in his 40s. He's interesting because this character acknowledges, and other characters acknowledge, that he seems to have a lack of emotion. There's not much of an emotional core to this character. He seems to have frequent dreams and maybe gets reality mixed up with the dreams or heavily affected by the dreams. It's suggested that he, suffers from a possible mental condition. But aside from that, he just smokes a lot of cigars, and he drinks an inordinate amount of cold water. That's one of his defining characteristics. And then there's his wife, Ursula, who this is an interesting character. She is able to split her affections equally between her husband, Allert, and her husband's best friend, Peter. So they're kind of involved in this ménage à trois, and she also, she seems balanced in that configuration. And highly sexualized, all three of the characters are. And she also acts sort of as a Freudian therapist to her husband, assisting him in interpreting his dreams. The character of Peter is Allert's best friend. He is a psychiatrist at an institution called Acres Wild. Kind of a tall, thin fellow, just full of theories. He's always smoking a pipe, and you get a sense that he might be something of an opportunist because he's in this situation, this ménage à trois, and not just taking advantage of Alert, his lack of emotional center, but seeming to revel in the configuration as much as Ursula. You can't really get a good sense of how Allert feels about the situation, but so there's that. That's the first dynamic, and that takes place largely in the Strand, having to do with life before the cruise. Then, through a series of events, the wife essentially forces or encourages strongly that Allert get on this cruise and have this vacation by himself. And then on the ship, he gets into a new ménage à trois, which is between a female passenger named Ariane, who seems to be just a younger version of Ursula. They end up getting into a new ménage à trois configuration with each other, plus a ship's wireless officer, actually other officers on the ship as well. She seems to also be accepting of Allert's lack of emotion and easiness with, or lack of possessiveness or jealousy. So as I was reading it, I got into it and I was quickly refamiliarized with Hawks's very dark, dense prose style, which I really like. The first couple pages, I know I'm in the hands of a master and I can just sit back and relax. I don't really pay attention to the page numbers as I'm reading Hawks. I actually like to drag it out, like I'm savoring it, like I'm smoking a cigar. So there's always this quote that's attributed to John Hawks, and the quote is, "I began to write fiction on the assumption that the true enemies of the novel were plot, character, setting, and theme." And reviewers always bring this quote up whenever they talk about Hawks, and just to kind of drive home the point that he was not your traditional realist or traditionalist writer, and that we get, I never really thought of him as a postmodernist. A lot of critics put him in the same group as Coover and Barthelme, but based on the books I'd read, I always thought of him as just a super, super ultra modern writer, not necessarily calling attention to the artifice of creation, but more that he was just a demanding author, and he kind of would force the readers to see his world through just his own strange and particular window. And, kind of reminds me of the filmmaker Cassavetes, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. You only get to see what he wants you to see, and it's up to you to kind of piece things together. There's a writer, Robbe-Grillet. Hawks really calls to mind that writer. Some people compared Hawks to Faulkner early on in his career, and I kind of see more of a similarity with him and Robbe-Grillet, especially last year at Marienbad with its distortion of like time and space. Jealousy, the voyeur, especially with what happens to the girl on the boat. It's kind of similar to how the crime in the voyeur was treated with regards to the girl in that book. Virginie over there, that book, it's interesting because that book and Robbe-Grillet's A Sentimental Novel, which was published recently after his death, are very similar to me, but there's no way that Hawks would have been able to read a sentimental novel. So I think they were just operating on the same wavelength, just in parallel. This same sort of dark side of humanity. So this book is just non-linear. There's the shards that just slowly expand and get pieced together, and then the narrative, I don't know, there's not really a narrative tension per se. It's more like John Hawks is just putting the reader on a torture rack and just slowly ratcheting it up and just seeing how much the reader can take. Well, I don't know that he's intentionally doing this. I think he's just expressing himself. And it'll rub most people the wrong way, especially with how Allert is treated. And it seems like a study of cuckoldry, which can seem like a nightmare to most men, and yet Allert is able to just take it in stride with just being jovial about it almost, and the people that are putting him in that situation are also jovial about it, and they're celebratory. In this world, it seems like sex, death, humiliation, pleasure, it all just goes hand in hand. And so you get a reaction from the reader because when you introduce a character that's just immune to various social mores, kind of like the character in Imre Kertész's Fatelessness, who had gone through the Holocaust, but at the end, that character thought of it as a memorable and fond experience. There's that discrepancy that really kind of scrapes at the reader. Hawks here, he doesn't really go blatantly surrealist, but there are moments when he does. That's in the context of dreams that Allert has, and I'm not a big fan of people talking about dreams, especially fictional characters talking about their dreams. But here, Hawks kind of uses these dream sequences maybe as a chance to be insightful or symbolic, and Ursula acts as his therapist, and kind of is a giving person with her interpretations, but sometimes she can be harsh. And in the end, I think the character concludes that there's really no one you can trust in the world. So this book was the perfect length for the story that it told, and after I finished reading it, I found it thoroughly enjoyable, and I wanted to go right back and reread it, and I actually did start rereading it. And then I came upon something interesting. The description, which takes place at the beginning of the book, of his wife leaving him, and that's also how the book ends. But I found something disturbing, and that was the way the wife was described. There's a huge difference in how she was described in the beginning, physically, like what she was wearing, the kind of suitcases she was packing, versus the description of her at the end of the book. Completely different. And that to me was just mind-blowing, because that made me question, okay, are we dealing with two separate realities? Is this narrator dreaming some of this stuff? Is this entire narrative to be trusted in any way? Are we dealing with someone unreliable? And then it struck me that, okay, yeah, this is a postmodern work. John Hawkes is really doing something there, and disturbing. But yeah, Hawkes is a great, he's a great writer. There's no doubt about it. I'm gonna pick up more of his work. I'll probably try to read everything he's written eventually. Cannibal, one of my all-time favorite books, and Second Skin. So yeah, I definitely recommend this book if you're a fan of John Hawkes. Death, Sleep, and the Traveler. Definitely gets you high.